Episode 103. Although we were provided with some Kate-centric flashbacks in part 2 of the pilot, Tabula Rasa is the first episode entirely dedicated to Miss Austen. This fugitive's tale is engrossing, displaying both Kate's tendency toward illegality as well as her heroic heart. All the while, the episode's final musical moments are some of my favorites of the series. The last scene features Joe Purdy's Wash Away, a beautiful song that perfectly encapsulates every second of Tabula Rasa's beautiful ending, as we're witness to the current state of our multitude of already complex crash survivors. The episode concludes with this rather eerie and foreboding and wicked sort of wraparound shot focused on the mysterious John Locke, about whom we learn in the sensational subsequent episode, 113. I've always really dug the Locke-Boone dynamic. It's even intriguing after Boone has died, but I'll get to that a bit later. A concept that I love, which is at its most prevalent throughout the first season, is that of Locke being this sort of spiritual guide to some of the survivors. He undoubtedly appointed himself this role due to his recent spiritual awakening as a result of the island miraculously healing his exceedingly grave injury. I adore the exploration of Boone's primary flaw, his emotional baggage, his obsession with Shannon and her safety. I also love the incorporation of the show's ever-prevalent letting go theme, not to mention the fact that the path to Boone ultimately deciding to let go consists of a drug-fueled, enthralling and intense monster-filled mind trip. 115. This is a fantastic episode that I was surprised to see so low on a number of greatest episodes countdowns. It really deepens the excellent character of Charlie Pace and wonderfully explains and depicts his motives. The story of Homecoming centers on Charlie's insatiable desire to truly take care of someone. Jack giving Ethan a revenge ass-kicking is so satisfying, as is Ethan being blown away by an armed Charlie, even though it was an emotional decision. But as I alluded to earlier, the entirety of this episode sets up and essentially explains why Charlie ultimately makes this decision. As he states to Jack nearing the episode's end, "I wasn't going to let him, Ethan, get anywhere near her, Claire, again." 204. This is a really entertaining Hurley-centric character story, which delves into his desperate desire for inertia, his fear of change. This episode, like many Hugo episodes, exudes a sense of levity and fun, as well as a great amount of heart. Now, I've read that some individuals sort of write off Hurley-centric episodes, considering them to be superfluous or filler. Some individuals deem an episode weak if it doesn't contain a substantial progression in the overarching narrative, or doesn't answer a big question. Mind you, in the case of the original TV promo for episode 309, the marketing department was at fault for misleading the viewer and pandering to the hype in regard to impending answers to Lost's biggest questions. If you aren't familiar, though I have discussed it in a previous video, Stranger in a Strange Land is widely considered to be the weakest episode of the series. This same episode's promo claimed that 3 big mysteries would be solved. There definitely aren't answers given to 3 important questions. The only question that is answered really is, what do Jack's tattoos mean? Which was never a mystery I was begging to be solved. The point being that this exciting promo setting up the show's weakest episode caused some frustration amongst viewers. But 309 is really the one and only episode I would consider to be unnecessary filler. But there are a number of episodes that don't necessarily launch the main plot forward, but they are nonetheless wonderful character pieces that develop said characters and their relationships, which ultimately enhances those big main plot progression filled episodes and moments, resulting in your great investment in these characters and their well-being. These pieces add weight to the ultimate action. Now back to episode 204 specifically. I mentioned the inertia theme earlier, which is relevant to both the A story on island and the B story off island. Within the flashback material, Hugo wins the lottery, but he keeps it to himself as he doesn't want to alter his best friend Johnny and crush Starla's perception of him. Meanwhile, on island, Hugo is reluctant to bear the responsibility of distributing the food within the Swan Hatch. He fears that he won't be able to provide everyone what they want and ask for. People will rely on him due to his food or wealth, and he will be resented if he is unable to provide. Hugo, with the emotional support of Rose, decides to stop worrying about what others might think of him as a result of his decision, and instead focuses on doing what he does best. He takes care of people. He knows, due to the vast quantity of survivors and the comparatively minimal quantity of food, that this finite Dharma grub simply won't be able to last, so he provides everyone on the beach a night of decadence and enjoyment and togetherness. The Shenanigans, starring Hurley and Johnny, portrayed by DJ Qualls, who you may recall from Breaking Bad, as he portrays an undercover officer who arrests Badger, are a ton of fun to watch. Not to mention, this episode does unquestionably contain some, if not substantial, intriguing plot developments. Not only are our survivors, Sawyer, Michael, and Jin, integrated into the group of tail section survivors, but also the, at this point in the show, long-running Bernard mystery is beautifully solved. Since the beginning of season 1, Rose has optimistically discussed the 100%, according to her, survival of her husband Bernard, who had been attending the bathroom in the back of Flight 815 when the plane was torn in half. So it is immensely heartwarming to see Bernard alive, and viscerally grateful and thankful when Michael informs him that his wife Rose is alive. 303. This episode is actually really prevalent for Locke as a character. Prior to the season 2 finale, Locke essentially lost his faith in the island, willing to let the button's countdown run down to 0. Locke smashes the computer, leading to the hatch and everything in it to go completely haywire, as Des goes to turn the failsafe key. Amidst all the destruction and chaos, Locke admits to Echo that he was wrong. We then see Desmond turn the key before the island vibrates, and the sky turns to a whitish violet color. We don't see Locke again until the commencement of episode 303, when John wakes up in the middle of the jungle, alone and mute. Fast forward to a private section of the beach, where we've got Locke and Charlie standing outside a tent. Locke communicates to Charlie via written word as he enters what he refers to as a sweat lodge, having claimed that he must enter this tent alone in order to speak to the island. He sternly tells Charlie to stand guard and not come in under any circumstances. There's an indescribably eerie atmosphere in the air as Locke sits before a fire, pouring boiling water on his head and consuming a substance that bears a resemblance to the drug he pasted onto Boone's head back in season 1, which fueled his utterly mind-bending and life-changing trip. I stated in a past Lost-centric video that, to me, classic Lost consists of Locke going on a physical and spiritual journey whilst being spoken to and guided by the island through his dreams and through visions, and Locke's Sweat Lodge trip is no exception. A suddenly wheelchair-bound Locke is pushed by Boone through an airport filled with our island inhabitants. Ultimately, a bloodied Boone informs Locke that he's got to clean up his own mess, as his hand grasps Mr. Echo's bloodied scripture stick. Just before Locke dives out of the tent, the vision of a polar bear leaps at him from out of the flames. An exasperated Locke lands in the sand outside the tent next to Charlie. He then gets to his feet and removes a knife, stating to Charlie out loud, no longer via written word, that he needs to save Mr. Echo's life. This entire trippy sequence is really stylistically directed and edited and powerful, in large part due to the unsurprisingly beautiful Giacchino-composed score. Throughout the trek toward the polar bear's cave, we get some really great banter between John and Charlie, as well as between Hugo and Desmond. I dig the attention to detail within the bear's cave, as we creepily catch a glimpse of an old dirtied kid's toy car. Locke's torch and hairspray technique to get rid of the polar bear is also super fun. Now, before I get into the wonderful scene nearing episode's end, featuring Locke and Echo's interaction, I'm first going to talk about the episode's fascinating Desmond component, before then delving into the Locke flashback material. During an encounter between Hugo and Desmond, Des mentions Locke's speech to a perplexed Hurley, who claims to know nothing about a speech. That is until the episode's final moments, in which Locke does in fact give survivors an inspiring speech, in which he mentions specifically what Des had stated earlier to Hugo. Hurley, more perplexed than ever, gazes out at Desmond, who is skipping stones into the ocean. And I'm sure I've mentioned this more than once in a past Lost video, but nevertheless, one of my favorite elements of this series, specifically its 3rd season, is the plotline featuring Desmond's premonitions, fueled by the Swan's failsafe's electromagnetic blast occurring at point-blank range. Now back to John and company. Locke and a battered, bruised, and unconscious Echo are sitting/lying down on the jungle floor. Locke states to Echo that he's sorry for losing his faith, sorry for not believing Echo and believing in the island. Locke is lost, mentioning Jack Sawyer and Kate's capture by the others. Suddenly, Echo speaks. He tells John that he can still save them, finishing his anecdote by saying, "After all, you are a hunter, John." This phrase will make more sense to you once I delve into the episode's flashback. But when the rest of Locke's company returns, Echo once again appears to be unconscious. So perhaps that had been the island communicating with Locke through Echo. Very intriguing and eerie. Nevertheless, either Echo or the island inspires Locke to make his speech about saving our survivors in captivity, which Desmond had foreseen. Now, onto John's flashback. The backstory featured in 303 incorporates the motifs we've seen in past great Jon-centric episodes. There's a general sense of tragedy, which is, unfortunately for Locke, a prevalent concept in his life. There's also an element of familial abandonment, as well as false familial trickery, though in past Locke episodes, namely 119 Deus Ex Machina and 217 Lockdown, Anthony Cooper has been Jon's symbol of familial distrust and nefarious trickery, whereas in further instructions, the family into which Locke integrates himself, and by episode's end basically feels disconnected from, is a drug manufacturing hippie commune, whilst the con/scam element appears in the form of an initially seemingly friendly hitchhiker that turns out to be an undercover cop. Earlier on in the episode, Eddie, as Locke is introducing him to the community, asks about a specific tent. Locke informs him that it is a sweat lodge, in which one is meant to meditate and have a spiritual experience, in which one is meant to learn whether one is a farmer or a hunter, which, as I've discussed, greatly ties into the A story of this episode.